Welcome to Fields of Consciousness, the podcast for consciousness conversations with your host, me, Jeffrey Stegman.
And Clayten Stedman.
As consciousness explorers and founders of Focus Life Force Energy, we're here to bring a holistic approach to consciousness and share practical examples of how you can take your life to the next level. From your environment to your thoughts, let's explore together how consciousness interacts with your everyday experiences.
In our last episode, we discussed the different scales of consciousness and the use of kinesiology. In this episode, we look at clearing negative histories of land, how to activate high consciousness fields, and dive more into our company, Focus Life Force Energy. Welcome to the podcast.
Welcome back to Fields of Consciousness. We're happy to have you with us. We're your hosts, Jeffrey and Clayten.
Today we'll discuss the creation of high consciousness fields and how we started Focus Life Force Energy, or what we often refer to as FLFE.
Yeah, sometimes people call FLFE fluffy as well, so we should mention that in case we accidentally do that. We had someone look at FLFE and come up with fluffy. Wasn't our choice. And then Regina Meredith picked it up and ran with it, and it stuck. So in the previous episode, we talked about the original inventor and how we first discovered the non-local effect of FLFE and of this energy.
And this is often referred to as quantum association or quantum resonance. And it's very similar to the effect of a healing prayer. So if you are holding somebody in mind, you have a unique identifier, that's the person, and you send them positive intentions. And so that would be a type of healing prayer and is also quantum association. So you're actually activating a field of energy around that person that you're praying for. And this also happens with Reiki. And there's twin research stories out there where people, where twins have the same thought at the same time in different locations. And I haven't met a mother yet that has ever not acknowledged that when something has gone wrong with one of their children, that at times they knew it immediately. They had a feeling of some type or a sensation.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is, common. It's a common everyday occurrence. We often just don't think of ourselves as human beings being quantum association generators, but we are. And so we wanted to just make this kind of simple because it's happening all the time to us. People often assume there's a frequency sent, but there's actually a field activated. It's a slight distinction that becomes important in later conversations.
There's also quite a bit of research out there on distant healing, prayer groups and rates of healing. So there's research about that as well.
Yes, it's a big phenomenon in our culture for sure. Okay, Jeff, why don't you tell us about one of our original stories about working with someone in a hospital we were trying to help?
Yeah, we had our own sort of bias about that, about things being local versus being able to do things non-locally with a quantum association like we're speaking about. And yeah, this was a hospital close to where I live, and there was a boy that I knew with cancer there. And we had sort of intuitively looked at the hospital and did some kinesiology testing around it. And just like we've talked about in previous episodes, there's the history of the thoughts and feelings in a location, and a children's hospital like this, there's just, there's a lot of suffering there, and anxiety and people dying. And so, and when it's children in particular, it just, there was like I don't know if vortex is the right word, but it was like a dark cloud that was there, negative, and it was a negative place to be, not a healing place. So, so we were, starting to work on like, how do we clear these kind of environments? And I thought I had to go up on the rooftop of the hospital, like try to find some coveralls that match the maintenance team and try to go up there and do some clearing. And when we had the realization, no, we could clear it remotely. Just like we're talking about with the quantum association, with an identifier for the space or for the location of it in the geography. So that's what we did, and we were able to see a clearing effect happen there. So Clayten, we had that initial realization, and there were other ones we've talked about in previous episodes of that nonlinear, breakthrough of really things being non-local. And then we went on and we did a lot of service work, but there was a lot of development of the FLFE system. We talk about the stacks of paper we used to deal with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so when we had come across this technology, originally we were putting 3x5 cards in what we describe as the output stack. And so we've talked about this earlier. There was 2 input stacks with the technology that would bring in the energy from the ether, and it would go out through an output stack. And at the bottom of the output stack was a little area where we put 3x5 cards in with request to divinity. And eventually we wanted to put more request to divinity in, so we made this output area much larger, so we could put like 8.5 by 11 pieces of paper in there because the thought forms would get sent out. And we had stacks of paper, and we had customers in the stack, and of course you had to make the stack larger and larger as the business grew. And these are all, actually some of them we still have just for kind of a keepsake. And then we discovered a way to link the output stack to a database. And we still have to use the unique identifier such as a legal address or coordinates or a cellular device. And so that hasn't changed. We've just found a way to give us more capacity to have more people on and more addresses. You want to talk about that?
I remember those stacks. Yeah, I remember those stacks. I mean, they were like, this high, and they were alphabetical, but you had to find, if a customer canceled the service, had to find that piece of paper and remove it from the FLFE system. It was so it didn't happen right away. It's just when I was able to do that. So it was pretty stressful at the time. I was really glad to find this way of associating the database with the FLFE system in this highly energetic space that's creates the quantum association. So once we basically have an instruction in the actual space that refers to the database, and then it's as though the Word docs are in the space. So that was a huge breakthrough for me. I was pretty stressed out by that on a day-to-day basis. But
can you imagine that? Can you imagine that now we've got like customers in 68 countries, and got what 20 about 24,000 PIFs we put on the pay it forwards, and over 10,000 customers. Can you imagine all that paper would be?
Yeah, I'd like to calculate how high that stack would be, just to give myself peace of mind about not having to do it.
Yeah, it'd be crazy making. I'm sure we could find a way though, but it's not the way I'd rather do it.
So before we started the business, we really had no intention to create a business. We were just looking for ways to serve, to raise consciousness. It was like all of 2012. That was quite a time. We were meeting often and looking at using Google Earth and looking around the planet?
Yeah, we would go on Google Earth and we would use kinesiology to measure the lowest consciousness place on a continent. We called it the critical factor. So the critical factor
Mm.
is defined as where you can put the least amount of effort in and get the most amount of gain in a system. And so we considered a continent a system, so to speak, in our language. And we would go around the Earth and find these low spots because we wanted to support the planet to make a positive transition at the end of 2012, or actually, the beginning of 2012, actually. Um, so that was a big focus for ours. And at some point, we were meeting every day in the morning to do that. And we came across some really interesting places. There's one town that I actually visited, and its main business is cursing. So if you want to curse somebody, or I guess in other vernaculars, you'd call it put a spell on somebody, you would go to this town and you would meet these people and they would put a curse on the person. And I didn't think places like this existed, but it was one of their main industries. And when I heard about this town and I went to visit it, I wanted to see what the experience is like of being there. And I'd actually talked to a local young man who lived in the area. He was working at a tourism business in town, and he talked about how there's been a construction project in the city going on, or in the town. It's just a little town. It had been going on for 15 years, and they weren't sure if they were any further ahead with the project than what they started. It was rebuilding a really old facility, and he said the town has a reputation for just not getting much done, and it's because of the negative energy in the town. It was really quite an odd place to be. I didn't notice the negativity much until I started driving through the small streets towards the center of town, and it almost felt like it was a labyrinth. And there was one point where I was lost, and the streets were so narrow you could only have one car go down them, and they were twisty and turny. And at some point, I decided to back out because I didn't know where I was in. If I was going to end up coming to a dead end, and there was a place that I had passed in the labyrinth that I knew I could get out from. So I just decided to back out. And there was a few moments there where I had to stop the car and get really present with the fear thoughts that were there, and the sense of claustrophobia. It was very visceral, and it was surprising. I didn't think it would be that negative, but there was something there. So we actually did a lot of service work on that town when we were doing the, trying to raise the level of consciousness for 2012, because it was a sinkhole of energy, for lack of a better word.
Do you recall the level of consciousness of that town before?
Yeah, that town was it was 85 overall, and there was
85 on the Hawkins
85
map.
on the Hawkins scale of consciousness, and there was areas of the town that were much lower. There was certain areas that were, when I went back, and you can just go on a satellite image and you can test with kinesiology, and you could actually go back in time. This was probably 2000, and when I was in the town, it was probably 2009. So you could go back in time and test with kinesiology the level of consciousness of that town, and then test places within the town. I think there were some areas within the town as low as 5. Yeah. Wow. So it was.
So, as I recall, 100 is fear on that scale.
Yeah.
So 85.
50 is shame. 20 is shame. 50 is despair. Yeah, 20 is shame. 50 is despair. The only place I've found 5 are. And I've only been to. Well, I wasn't in a place that was 5 in that town, but I was in a place that was 5 out of 1,000 on the Hawkins map, in an area about 2 hours from there. The only place I've found 5 is prisons where they were torturing people, and places like the inside of the the gas chambers in the concentration camps. So there's it's a dark. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's really why we've come to how do we clear? That was a big breakthrough with FLFE. Is and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Is how we came to use the technology to clear these negative thought forms and emotions and feelings from the land and buildings. And at that time, we didn't have that. We were just adding to the level of consciousness of these various places. And it was really an amazing time because Google Earth was relatively new, at least to me. And just zooming around the planet that way and using kinesiology to test the level of consciousness. And what we were looking for was what was the lowest spot on the continent that it was like a trigger point, or like you said, Clayten, like a sinkhole of energy, where if there was a positive change there, that it would affect the whole continent. So that's really the service work we did during that 2012. But it was fun zooming around and then getting the coordinates and putting them on a piece of paper, and that would go into the system.
Yeah, and I've met, we have a friend, Ashley, and she was part of a group that would travel around the world to these places and do the work on the ground, in a similar, in a different way than we were doing it. So there's lots of people that are, contributing to this, and our way is just the way that we were able to figure out. And it was a exciting time. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we got to the end of 2012, and it just, wow, that was cool.
Yeah.
I just remember like after the 21st, when the equinox, we talked, we said, wow, that was really fun and interesting. And I hope we did some good. And then we just got the message really to start a business, and we'll talk a little bit more about business's spiritual path and the amount of good that can be done with a business. And we've continued on with this service work. It really became part of the business as we conceived it early in 2013.
Yeah, I think we're giving I think the average is about 95% of the energy that we generate with the technology is given in service work, Jeff. I think that's about the number. Yeah.
Yeah. We have a web page about that at flfe.net, and the concentration camps was one of those big projects that was quite emotional. Finding those locations, the coordinates, and then putting the service on and really watching. And that's when we were starting to clear and just helping those locations to to be free of some of the negative history that was there, and the beings that were stuck there in those environments. So there's quite some interesting experiences we've had doing these service projects around the world.
Yeah, and we've done lots of service projects besides just trying to counter the negative. We've tried to enhance the immune system of bees. We put service projects on the feeding grounds of whales with the intention of giving them a more energized source of food to help them. And there's different areas where treaties have been made and broken. And there's a negative history there. There was we also did the Cambodia killing fields, Jeff, and some other war zones. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We just started a new service project with the FLFE team. So the staff's really taking this on and running with it, which is great, to clear the negative history around the Canadian residential schools. Yeah, there's some things coming to light there I'm sure it's big news in Canada, huh?
Yeah, there's they have new technology now with some radar that allows them to see into the ground and count the number of bodies. And there's there wasn't records of people being buried, and so they're finding, sometimes 90 or 100 or 200 people that have been buried, and the records are incomplete. So people are pretty outraged about it.
Yeah, those of you that haven't heard about that, these were schools where Native children were forced to go live in schools away from their families and their communities, and sort of forced to learn English and, quote unquote, become white. So they were, a lot of mistreatment and not so good things happening. So this project, the staff will be getting the coordinates together and doing what we can to shine the light, increase the positivity there.
Yeah, and when we're doing these service projects, there's a law of non-interference that we're aware of. There's a certain level of consciousness of energy that you have permission, or what is in the highest and best interest of all creation, that we call it, that you can put on those places, and there's a level where you can't put them on, according to our research. And so we're respectful of that. We can measure that on the Hawkins map of consciousness, and we can talk about that in more detail at another time. It's really similar to what we call a pay it forward, or PIF subscription, that FLFE gives away when people sign up for the service. It's at a lower level of consciousness and doesn't have a lot of the other influences on it that we offer for the paid subscription. So.
Yeah, I think at last count we were 22,000. It's many hundreds more now, but we were at 22,000 of those PIFs, or paid forward subscriptions, around the world.
Yeah, it adds up. Eh?
It does. Maybe we could talk a little bit, Clayten, about the creation of high consciousness fields. It's what we do with FLFE, and we've talked about fields of consciousness, and with this technology, we are supporting the activation or the creation of these high consciousness fields. Let's talk a little bit about that. What happens first?
Well, what we discovered is that when we were learning to clear the land of negative history, so the memories of the land are still there. It's just the trauma is not when you clear it. So when you're clearing the land, you typically want to remove the negative energy first. It's like cleaning a room before you paint it. You want to go and wash down the walls so that you get the true color of the paint, and it doesn't, you're not painting on dirt. And so a high consciousness field is a field or an energetic area that is higher in vibration than one would normally experience. So if you think about pilgrimage sites around the world, some of the cathedrals in Europe are really well known for this. They have spontaneous healings occur there for people. And they're just places that are known to be able to find peace. And the quality of the place is often associated with an event that somebody had, and others go back to that place. So one of those places might be for healing. Another might be for receiving more abundance in your life. Another may be to make peace with a relationship that's troubling for you, or attract a more positive relationship in your life, or a positive one. So these have different specific qualities to their field in that area because of the focus of people's thoughts. And so in many ways, the FLFE service, or any high consciousness area, it's like having thousands of monks praying for a place. And that positive energy goes into the physical structure of the area. So if you're in a house and you have drywall on the walls, and you have a concrete foundation, blocks or poured concrete, that's a crystalline form, and crystals are known to hold energy. And so these places hold those positive intentions and positive thought forms. And, through the quantum association, you can do that remotely. And that's how FLFE does it. We do it remotely as well. So we can put it on a location or around an object such as a cell phone.
Yeah. And that first benefit is really all that additional energy that's there, all that life force energy. And the Hawkins map has been such a great tool for us to be able to see what's happening, as we learn to use this technology, that we could measure the change and measure the level of consciousness being different, each point upwards being 10 times more life force energy there. So you have this exponential energy increase that supports life, which we see in the plant studies and, of course, subscribers and our own experiences. And just having more of that energy present, it's like the body kicks into a different, kind of, number one, kicks into a different healing state. And we don't make health claims, but we have a lot of stories from customers in our testimonials where there's just more energy available. And then, as you were saying, also the qualities, the qualities of the field, which we learned from these pilgrimage places and cathedrals and, bones of saints. And some of those are really high. So what are some of the other qualities that we are building into the FLFE field?
Yeah, I guess I'll just pick up on what you said about the Hawkins map of consciousness. If we weren't competent in using that, I don't know if I would do this business, because we have a lot of power with this technology, and to be able to measure the truthfulness of the influence that we're having or the positive effect, I think it's essential. And I just want to express my gratitude for David Hawkins and creating that. We're not associated with him in any way. We're just students of his work. And it's a pretty essential part of what we do. Jeff, without that, I don't know how we do this, really. Yeah.
We're building on his work there, which was really groundbreaking, both the non-local aspect of it, kinesiology, that you could test something on the other side of the planet, and the scale itself. Yeah, there's so much wisdom. And we've talked about in previous episodes the field around him, how high consciousness he was. And if you go to a YouTube video of Dr. David Hawkins, it's really pretty amazing, the experience of that. Going back to the clearing of the negative energetic history on the land a little bit. While you were talking, I was thinking about, when we started, like when we were doing the service work and in the beginning of FLFE, it, like you said, if you didn't clean the room before you painted it, and that way of talking about it, it took a long time for the LOC to come up, or the level of consciousness to rise. And that clearing was really a important step. And, there was quite a process when we created that removal template that we used for clearing there. It's part of the FLFE service. Like you said, it's the first thing that happens. We really had to kind of lay out all the possible negative things that could happen on the land.
That was dark, man. It was weeks of writing out all the negative possibilities that humans could do to other humans, humans do to animals, humans do to the earth. And we've added quite a few since then. It seems with the technology, one of the things we discovered, Jeff, is that the more obviously the specific the request is, the better it clears. And if I recall correctly, it used to take us 3 days to get the property to 540 on the Hawkins map of consciousness. And now we get it to 560, typically within 5 seconds. Actually, it's the first couple of minutes, it's actually 580, right? So trying to get rid of the negative history. So, if you're familiar with the Hawkins map of consciousness, 540 to about 570, 580 is the unconditional love zone. And that's the sweet spot in terms of the optimal conditions for the evolution of consciousness in an economized society where we have to work.
And that document was long at the time when we first created it, but now it's probably 4 or 5 times longer because we keep adding to it when we discover new things that we can specify, where micro negativity zones, where maybe a smaller area that's pretty strong, and it takes really specific instructions to clear it. And I'm reminded of the story too. I think it was in British Columbia. We had a property early on in this clearing process where the property just felt strange to the owners. Periodically, not all the time. It felt really good most of the time, but then they would get this feeling of it, like coldness and just negativity, and then it would go away, and then it would feel good again. And I remember when we looked at that, and it was partly intuitive and kinesiology, that there was some kind of altercation. There was a fight there, and there was a trapped soul that was moving through the property, tracking its parents that it saw being taken away like 1,000 years before. And that's the kind of detail that it only appeared every once in a while that we needed to write into the removal template to clear that sort of thing.
Yeah, we're getting into the nonlinear kind of intuitive zone, and with kinesiology, you can assess the situation and create a healing for it. And then you have to, one of the ways we rely on knowing the truth is to have the customer give us the feedback that the environment is different. And we can go back and check the level of consciousness of the area and see that it hasn't changed. And that was really how we discovered how to mitigate EMFs or harmonize EMFs, Jeff. Remember when we were? So we test all the properties once a week to make sure they're at the level that we promise. We promise 560 out of 1,000 on the Hawkins map, 98% of the time over a 24-hour period. And we were finding that some of the properties were dropping below that level. And we would call the customers, and we'd find out that they had, to see if there's anything different in the home or find out what was going on. We had a smart meter put in, or a cell phone tower went up across the street, or we had a new 5G router installed. And so, and what that did was it dropped the level of consciousness of the property. And we ended up discovering that if you raise the level of consciousness of a device, and the way we talk about EMFs is we divide them into 2 categories: consciousness lowering EMFs and consciousness raising EMFs. So consciousness raising EMFs are the EMFs that come from a loving person, from a dog wagging its tail when you come home, cat purring. And with the consciousness lowering EMFs, we found if you raise the level of consciousness of the emitting device to 580 out of 1,000 or higher on the Hawkins map, it would start to emit a positive signal, or actually that would neutralize the signal. And then and we found that if you added the energetic signature of shungite to the environment, that would then harmonize it or make it positive, or positive to life. So when you are dealing with EMFs, you can try to block them. You can try to deflect them somewhere else, but that could harm somebody. Or you can try to dissipate them and break them up. And the other possibility is neutralizing them. And optimally, if you can harmonize them, that's the way to go. And shungite is the only substance we found that allows you to harmonize an EMF. So there's a bit of a story around that one, but maybe you can talk about water, Jeff, unless you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, it's really important for us that the FLFE environment has, it's an optimal place to be. So it's healthy. And that's when we started to see that occurring, the environment was dropping in its consciousness, and to us means it's less healthy. And so for us, it's important that the FLFE environment be as pristine and positive as possible, supporting us in our lives. And once we saw that reduction in the consciousness due to the EMFs, we knew we had to do something about it. So again, we're talking about the characteristics of the field, and there's many others that we've built in using written documents that we call programs. You might hear us refer to those once in a while. And so water structuring is one of those, the energizing of food. Again, as Clayten said, the more specific we can be with this technology, the more things occur. And we very specifically ask for food when it enters the body of a person to be energized with this life force energy. Just as food, fresh food that you maybe pick right off a plant has a lot of life force energy in it. And then we expanded that to specific nutrients as well. But we don't make medical claims. We believe the innate intelligence of the body is amazing and does the healing. And when it has the energy available to it and it has the resources, that it gets to work.
Yeah, we have some interesting research on water restructuring. If you go up to flfe.net and look on the evidence page, you'll find a study we just completed with Dr. Emoto's lab, where you can see the geometric structure of water in an FLFE environment. And we've just done some more research on that, and it's really exciting to see it in physical form. So that's another example where you can have some proof for yourself.
I don't think we've said it, Clayten, but it may be evident from our explanation, but there is no physical device that gets sent to a customer. This is all done through the quantum association that we've been talking about. And the advantage of that is you can turn it on and off. You can try it, go to the free trial. There's no credit card. You could try the service, and you could activate the field and see how it feels to you. So it's an advantage of the physical, not needing a physical device, is you can turn it on and off and experiment yourself. So there's a lot that goes.
Yeah, and then when we do an upgrade, we don't have to bring back thousands of devices and upgrade them. We can just do it all centrally. So it's actually a way of really helping us improve the service faster.
Over-the-air updates, right?
just like a Tesla car.
Yes. Yeah, and these happen fairly frequently, especially on the clearing side, where we find new things that pop up either from a customer telling us their observations or what we measure when we test all of the properties once a week. So the testing of all the properties is one of the behind the scenes sort of quality control pieces. There's a lot that goes on there. I recall when we really were starting to get into this EMF, and there were a lot of properties that weren't at the 560 level or the 540 level at the time. And we had to do a lot of scrambling, and those customers got the service for free during that time to come up with this mitigation in order to get the properties up to 560. So that was quite a time. We were spending a lot of time doing testing and work to mitigate. Now it's a lot more routine, still like a daily process.
Yeah, we still test all the new properties every day that come on the service and make sure they're at the level we promise. Yeah, I guess I didn't mention earlier about the promise. If it's not 560, 98% of the time over a 24-hour period, you get it for free until we fix it. And of the tens of thousands of people that have tried this service, I think there's only 2 or 3 properties that I can think of, Jeff, that we haven't been able to get to that level and keep it there. And it's that's pretty rare that we can't get it up. It's just a matter of spending the time on it. And some of this stuff, it's pretty obscure.
And again, I would second what you said about how important the map of consciousness and the kinesiology and the ability to test and the input from customers that we hear about that, what occurs for them. When we think about these fields of consciousness around the world, these, mosques, cathedrals, pilgrimage sites, springs, like at Lourdes,
Yes.
those develop sort of on their own naturally through lots of people. There may have been at first a natural feature there, an earth feature, that a vortex of energy or some kind of water with special characteristics. And then as human consciousness enters the picture, and those fields have been built, and here we have an opportunity to activate a field of consciousness and create the optimal characteristics for the evolution of consciousness. It's quite a privilege.
Yeah, and it's in some ways it's surprisingly technical. There's certainly a nonlinear aspect to it, but the use of the Hawkins map of consciousness and kinesiology, when we're writing out these requests to divinity or the programs, we have a safety valve on the end of them, which says, do this in such a way that's in the highest and best interest of all creation. And as we revise these programs, sometimes some of them take months to do, because we write out the intent of what we're trying to do. Say we're trying to increase the quality of relationships in the high consciousness field that we're creating, and we can do, say, the field between a mother and a child, or a father and a child, mother and father, a brother and sister, sister and sister, brother and brother, all the different variations you can imagine on those themes. And we will write out the request to divinity, and then measure the truth of that in the context of trying to create more harmony in the household. And those are actually a lot of fun times, because there's like a discovery of what the truth is in that context, in that environment. And sometimes you're surprised what you don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, there is a feeling in the field between us and with whoever else we're working with, when reaching those higher levels of truth, it really feels good in your body. Yeah, it's just amazing.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's just one word, or it's just like a period in the wrong spot. It's just amazing to get to that final bit, to get it to that really pristine state. It's really an interesting process to test and change and test and change. And we have these 1,000 out of 1,000 statements that we use occasionally, and so, or find or create through this process. And we have a new energizing nutrients program that we're working on, and it's a lot of pages. I think it was 60 something pages. So combing through that and finding and bringing it up to that 999 or higher level of truth it's a lot of work.
Yeah, for those who are familiar with the Hawkins map of consciousness, the level of consciousness of the documents, the programs, the request to divinity, before we put them on the service, they're 999 or higher out of 1,000 on the Hawkins scale. So they're very accurate in the context that the request is made. And once we do that, the first thing we do is, Jeff and I are the first beta group. We believe anything that we do, we should put on ourselves. And then we have a small beta group around us. Sometimes the beta group wants to go on with us. We do it at the same time. And we have a research team devoted to auditing it with us. And then we typically will have some friends and family. So there's a lot of controls in how we roll these out. And yeah, we feel good about the efficacy of that, and that's something we've had in place right from day one. I find it difficult when people make a product that they sell to the public and they won't feed it to their family or use it on their family. So, yeah, I like the way we do that.
yeah, there are some stories of executives in computer companies where their kids don't use computers. Yeah, the research team is really coming along. It's you'll see it in the evidence page, and it will continue to evolve as you maybe come back and look at it. We have some very credible researchers around North America who are assisting us in really getting to a gold standard of research, where we have phases of experiments and results, much like the biochemical and biological and pharmaceutical phases, where phase one is really a small sample size, not very controlled. And then you're moving to larger sample sizes and more controls and double blind. And so we have several double blind experiments happening right at this moment. One is a large scale farm plant growth experiment. And the other is an EMF sensitives experiment.
Yeah, we also have on our evidence page studies that we've done with the Institute of Noetic Sciences in Petaluma, California, where we've demonstrated that the technology makes the random number generators in a Faraday cage room less random. So we're able to. So that's the part of the influence of a high consciousness field. It creates harmony and unity within the environment. And so that affects random number generators. And we also have positive results, people who were hooked up to a bunch of EKG sensors on their body, those little things you see when people are getting tested. And I don't know if they're EKG, maybe they're EGG. Might have my...
Yeah, we actually did both. We did EEG and EKG in that experiment. Yeah.
And was it a positive? So there's a positive increase in executive function, Jeff?
That's right. Yeah, that's right, Clayten. They were given math problems to solve, and other kinds of word problems. And the FLFE field was turned on and off by the researcher. Again, this is a phase one. It was a small group. But there was an increase in executive function, and there was also an increase in the alpha waves, really throughout the brain, when the FLFE field was active for the people in the experiment, and that indicates a moving. Alpha waves are seen to predominate in meditation, and different types of biofeedback systems help you to stay in the alpha state. And so this was natural. This happened, naturally or as a result of the characteristics of the field for those people.
Yeah, some of the new people in our research team are multi-degreed, accomplished people from some of the Ivy League universities of the world. So there's a world-class standard of information and efficacy that we're stepping into in that regard. So they're great guys to work with.
And we'll have podcasts in the future with some of those on, and get into more detail as these experiments unfold. The other sort of basis of our work together, Clayten, and really important to both of us, is business as a spiritual path. And when we hit that 2012, the end of 2012 and next year, and how do we serve? And really what came through is business, using a business to distribute, these high consciousness fields that people could choose themselves and give the pay it forward subscription. And I know you had worked quite a long time in that field before we got together.
Yes, I spent 11 years in an Eastern-based philosophy, starting in the early 80s. I guess I'm dating myself here. And then in the mid-90s, I sort of went through a career planning process and there was an emerging field called business coaching and personal coaching at the time, and now it's very well established, but it was kind of pioneering in the early 90s. And I decided to use a lot of the transferable skills that I had from my kind of philosophical studies, and I'd worked for private schools for 11 years. And I decided to specialize in business as a spiritual path in a coaching practice. And so I've had that since 1995. I do very little coaching anymore because FLFE takes up most of my time. But that was, so I've been exploring the relationship between business and spirituality professionally since 1995. I had other jobs at the time, some in the beginning to support myself. And the focus of that was really the acknowledgement that in the world today, business is where the power is. It used to be perhaps in the arts in the Renaissance era, or in religion at a different time in history. And I think it's pretty evident right now that business is the biggest concentration of power on the planet. And I thought I could potentially do the most good by focusing on where the power is. And so I made some distinctions between business as a spiritual practice, business as a spiritual path, and business as a spiritual service. And that's what I appreciated about you, Jeff. You were sort of on that same parallel path in a slightly different way, focusing on improving the culture. I think that was the context that you had used it in your companies, and I think that's why we were able to do this and focus on this mission together, because we've been on the same path and just maybe a slightly different way for a long time before we met.
Yeah, some of the relatable examples of that for me were at the time, which we've carried forward into FLFE, is related to sort of your stance in the world as a company and as the people in it, that we always tried to do what we said we were going to do. So there's this really looking at the promises, like where have we made either consciously or unconsciously promises to the customers and to the world, and really sticking to those. And if you don't, and things happen, you miss the boat, you miss the shipment, something happens, to really own up to it, to own up to those changes and really do what you can to make sure it doesn't happen again. So, there's a lot we're doing in the FLFE business to run it as business as a spiritual path, checking that something is in the highest and best interest of all creation. That's sort of our phrase. If something's in the highest and best interest of all creation, we're kind of in the zone, we're in the flow of life, and using kinesiology and kind of feeling in our bodies to test that we're in alignment there, and applying it in the business, whether it's hiring somebody. I mean, you just went through an amazing process, a big system to test the remuneration, the pay for people in the business.
Yeah, there was about 12 different factors that we were considering in remuneration. And I think in our hiring process now we have 37 things that we measure about people in terms of their consciousness and their capacity to do the job. Besides the regular interviewing processes, kinesiology can really give you an edge in finding people that you're aligned with and doing other things. It just takes a lot of time to create the system to, you have the context, but then you got to create all the inquiries. So those are the declarative statements that you ask to try to understand where people are coming from. And so that's part of how we do business as a spiritual path. There's the other thing I like that we do, and we haven't done much of it lately, is we do things called attunements, where we tune into the energy of the business and ask it how it wants to express in the world. And some people see a picture, or they hear, sort of words, or they see a vision of a graph or something like that. I tend to see pie charts and percentages. But, we have the team sit in a circle, and it could be, 30 people in a circle. Maybe you have different circles. and everybody gets a chance. We set up the container, and everybody gets a chance to give their feedback, and out of that comes kind of a collective, unified agreement about how the business wants to move forward. And it's kind of a neat process. And I learned that from Dorothy McLean, who was one of the founders of Finhorn. I spent a week in a training process with her. And that was a big part of how they ran Finhorn, which is kind of known as one of the most successful intentional communities on the planet. And it's a neat process.
Yeah, you mentioned setting up the container, and I'll just expand on that a little bit. That's activating the field. So that part of running business as a spiritual path is really recognizing fields of consciousness, and in our case, using those intentionally for creativity, to move the business forward, to bring people closer together and aligned with the mission. And so creating that container for the attunements, it's a invocation of some kind, and it's, connecting to divinity in our individual ways as a group. And that group energy together is that field being activated. And the higher that goes in consciousness, what we've seen is the thinner the veil, and the higher the truth that emerges. So then each person in that attunement then is kind of in that field of consciousness that supports them to connect and sort of see how the business wants to express in the world, and through their unique their unique gifts. And we did that same process with the experimental team, the research team, where we spend months, activating a field, being together, bringing things up and presenting them in the field, and just building the consciousness of that container. I think a container is a great way to think about it. That's really something that we're using in the business as a way to move it forward and to be, connected to the flow of you could say the flow of divinity, the flow of energy, and the mission we have.
Yeah, setting up a high consciousness field amongst a group of people, it can be a very deliberate, planned process with consistent outcomes if you need to have a certain level of consciousness to do a certain type of work. And we found that, as Jeff said, certain things don't come down unless there's a level of truth in either between the person and divinity, or between the group of people and divinity. And so that's a process that was developed over years in the coaching practice, and it doesn't just happen by accident. And when I think of a high conscious field, I'm just thinking of like having Sunday dinner at your grandmother's place, right? I mean, if she's a loving, or the grandparents are loving people, and they're at that stage in life where they're able to have that kindness, and they're free from typically hopefully the affairs of making a living and surviving in the world, and they're able to hold space, and it's a retrieve or a retreat from the world, in a sense, the world of the workaday world. So this is really things that we all experience. Maybe some of us haven't experienced that, but there are enough experiences in society where people talk about those events, and they have great warmth in their hearts for them, and they're some of the fondest memories that people have.
Yeah, we talked in previous episodes about rescue workers, first responders, and the kind of field that's becomes activated with those people, over and over, going into these kind of situations, and that field of consciousness that is part of their, you could say, creativity or sensitivity to find people that are trapped in buildings and those kind of things. So yeah, we're talking about using that kind of consciously, intentionally creating fields in order to move things forward. And our customers, between what we're doing in the business and our customers. Our mission is to support the optimal conditions for the evolution of consciousness in a economized society, where we all have to work and make a living, pay our rent. But really, it's our customers are raising the consciousness by being on the service, working together.
Yeah, and people say, well, we've had people say, well, how do you feel about having a business that helps raise consciousness and you charge for it? And Jeff and I had other businesses before we started FLFE, and we still do. At some point, unless you have extraordinarily large amounts of personal resources, and part of that is money, you can only do so much. And what we determined was that unless, an angel investor came along or some benefactor who would give us, a large amount of money, like probably in the millions, that the best way to distribute this in the world or get it out into the world was to start a business. And we've been in business now for just about 8 years, and we've got 30. Well, I think yesterday we talked about 37 people on the team, Jeff, between contractors and how you want to define, a full-time person. We're in, 68 countries. And so for us to, we just didn't have those personal resources to hire all those people and, make payroll and invest in the technology and, rents, like we have 5,000 square feet of office space, and there's a lot of overhead, and unless you have tens of millions of dollars to donate to something, the only way we could see doing it was to start a business, and that was the sense that it was the right thing to do.
Yeah, and the creativity that the customers that are part of the FLFE community, they're bringing their own creativity in how they use the high consciousness field. Because people are discovering they can, in a high consciousness field, they can bless other people in other places. And the energy, the power is there to really accentuate that. And then their creativity on the pay it forwards and the PIFs, we could never have thought of all the places that they've put those. Many people are putting those on local, places of worship and prisons and children's schools, and it's just a gift of love. It's just a loving environment that they're gifting. So we could have never thought of all those places that this working together with the FLFE community. It's just so much expanded than what we could do, even if we had a lot of money. There's the whole creativity side. It's sort of a crowdsourcing consciousness, where everybody is their own piece and their own specialty and their own gift to the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, many hands make light work.
Yeah, it's really it's great to talk to the customers when they call in on. We do occasional Q&A webinars that call in and talk to us, but also to call the office. We've got such a great staff, and we have very extended hours so that customers, people in the community can call in and talk to someone. So it's all that in the Facebook page and other ways of talking together. It's there's so much creativity, so many people on the path in different ways. Mm-hmm. So Clayten, in previous episodes, we've talked about being aware of our thoughts. Is that my thought? Where did that thought come from?
Yes.
And thought forms, we've talked about thought forms in different areas and managing our thoughts. What do you think this week would be a good thing for people to take away from this episode?
Yeah, well, we've talked a lot about high consciousness fields this week and different locations where you might find a high field and how you're creating fields everywhere you go. You're creating conscious fields all the time. And so I think we could explore noticing the thought patterns that aren't serving you. So
Mm.
negative self-talk is something we all have to work with. And we maybe manage those thoughts in different ways, and we've talked a little bit about that in the past, and we'll talk a lot more about in the future. So if you're noticing negative thought patterns between this episode and next episode, we're just going to encourage you to look at the environment you're in. And do you think that environment has a high consciousness field in it or a low consciousness field? Yeah, we have a pretty big bias about that, but we'll let you have your own experience with it. And of course, take the time or we encourage you to take the time to replace that negative thought with a positive intention. And the theme here is to really look at your thought patterns and how they're influenced by the environment that you're in.
Yeah, I certainly find when I'm walking around the world that I'll just get into a pattern. I'm like, wow, where did that come from? I haven't noticed that in a while. And, I'm walking in a part of the city that maybe I haven't been in for a while. So it really is, as we've talked about in other episodes, there's fields of consciousness everywhere. They're all around us. They're interacting with us all the time. And to look at that interface between what's going on in our own minds and where we are in the world.
Yeah, it might be around certain people in the world as well. If you're around some really healthy people, you might find you're having more thoughts about how to improve your health, or it's easier to make healthy choices. So it's not only physical places, it's people. People are extremely powerful. And so it's fun to pay attention to your thinking and look at what might be influencing around you, whether it's the place you're in or a particular person you're with. Thank you for joining Fields of Consciousness, the podcast of consciousness conversations. We invite you to visit the link below the episode to experience a completely free trial of Focused Life Force Energy for 15 days.
If you'd like, you can subscribe to the Fields of Consciousness podcast, and please tune in next time. We release new episodes every other week on Tuesdays at 11:11 a.m. PST. Onward and upward.